They would remember her as a ghost who used a mountain as a weapon. They would speak in hushed tones of the arrogant commander who saw only a quiet woman with a strange machine, and the seasoned SEAL who saw the only solution and handed her his rifle. But before she became a legend in that valley of knives, before the silence was broken by the single, impossible shot that changed everything, Dr. Alara Vance was just a geologist, tuning her scope, listening to the mountain's deep grammar and waiting for the world to break. The air at Forward Operating Base Sentinel was not air. It was a physical presence, a compound of pulverized granite, diesel fumes, and the desiccating heat of a sun that seemed to hang motionless at its zenith for most of the day. The FOB was a raw wound scraped into the hide of the Peck River Valley, a place of jagged gray peaks that clawed at a bleached blue sky. The mountains were not majestic. They were hostile, an immense architecture of geological violence frozen in time. They were knives, and the base was the soft flesh caught between them. Vance felt the pressure of them in her bones, a constant, low-frequency hum that vibrated up through the soles of her boots and settled in her teeth. It was a language she understood better than the clipped, urgent jargon that echoed across the HESCO barriers. She was positioned at the far western edge of the perimeter, away from the clamor of the motor pool and the rhythmic thud of boots on gravel walkways. Her station was an island of esoteric technology in a sea of conventional warfare. A hardened pelican case lay open, its foam guts spilling cables that snaked to a tripod-mounted device. To the soldiers who passed by, it looked like a surveyor's theodolite, an object of civilian curiosity. They saw the woman, small-framed and dressed in sterile khaki cargo pants and a plain gray technical shirt, and they saw the machine, and they filed her away under the category of non-essential personnel. A scientist, a geologist, someone from a three-letter agency that sent people to study rocks while men fought wars. They did not see the array of geophones she had spent a week burying in a precise spiraling pattern outward from the base, their fiber optic lines converging on the data logger at her feet like the strands of a vast subterranean web. They did not understand that the scope she was meticulously calibrating was not just measuring angles and distances, but was a terrestrial laser scanner painting the opposing mountainside in 1 billion points of light, building a digital model of the rock face so precise it captured fractures the width of a human hair. Her world was one of signal-to-noise ratios, of seismic refraction, of acoustic propagation through layered strata of schist and gneiss. She was not studying the rocks, she was listening to them. For the past 3 weeks, she had been building a baseline, a complete sensory profile of the valley. She knew the exact time the morning sun would heat a specific rock face, causing it to expand with a groan that registered as a 0.2 hertz tremor on her southernmost sensor. She knew the unique acoustic signature of a loose scree slope, giving way a kilometer up the valley, a soft hiss followed by a percussive cascade that was distinct from the crackle of a distant unseen firefight. She had mapped the way sound bounced and bent through the jagged terrain, creating echoes that arrived out of sequence, phantom noises that could trick the ear and fool conventional detection systems. The valley was a complex acoustic mirror, and she was learning its secrets. She was tuning her instrument, and the instrument was the mountain itself. The silence of her work was a coiled thing, a dense quietude that was shattered by a voice like a blunt instrument. "What in the hell are you still doing with that thing, Doctor?" Lieutenant Commander Thorne stood with his hands on his hips, a posture of innate, unthinking authority. He was the commander of the SEAL team stationed at Sentinel, a man carved from the same hard material as the surrounding peaks, but without their patient stillness. His jaw was perpetually tight, his eyes a pale, impatient blue. He radiated a kinetic energy that seemed to scour the air around him. He saw the world as a series of targets, and anything that could not be targeted was a distraction. Dr. Vance and her strange, silent work were the greatest distraction of all. He looked at her setup, the delicate interplay of optics and sensors, and saw only waste. A waste of space, a waste of bandwidth, a waste of logistical effort. Vance did not look up immediately. Her focus was on the micro-adjustments of the scanner's azimuth dial. A faint whirring sound, barely audible, was the only response for a full 10 seconds. She was tracking the thermal expansion of a granite pluton across the valley. The data was beautiful, a clean sine wave that correlated perfectly with the rising ambient temperature. Finally, her fingers stilled. She straightened up, turning to face him. Her expression was neutral, her eyes calm and analytical. She did not squint against the sun. Her gaze was as steady as the machine beside her. "I'm calibrating for atmospheric distortion, Commander," she said. Her voice was low and even, a stark contrast to his grating baritone. It carried no inflection, no deference, no defensiveness. It was a statement of fact. Thorne snorted, a sound of pure derision. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her workstation. He gestured dismissively at the screen of her ruggedized laptop, which displayed a swirling vortex of multicolored data points. Atmospheric distortion, right. And this, he tapped the screen with a thick finger, leaving a smudge. This tells you what? When the rocks are going to get a sunburn? Some of his men, loitering nearby, chuckled. They were a Greek chorus to his arrogance. Vance's eyes flickered to the smudge on her screen. She felt a brief, clinical spike of irritation, a deviation from her baseline emotional state. She mentally categorized it, filed it, and dismissed it. She met his gaze again. It tells me the precise material composition and structural integrity of every square meter of that mountain. It tells me how energy, kinetic, or acoustic will propagate through it. It's a model. A model, Thorne repeated, drawing the word out as if it tasted foul. We are in a war zone, Doctor. We deal in reality, not models. My men deal in controlled explosions and precise application of force. What you're doing is an academic exercise, a very expensive, very useless academic exercise. I have operators who need every inch of this perimeter for fields of fire, and you're taking up valuable real estate to play with your rock collection. His frustration was a tangible force, like the heat shimmering off the gravel. It was the frustration of a man for whom the world was simple, a world of good guys and bad guys, of bullets and bodies. He could not comprehend a weapon that did not have a trigger, or a threat that could not be seen through a rifle scope. Vance's work was an affront to his worldview, a complex, nuanced variable in his binary equation of war. My work is mandated by CENTCOM Special Projects Division, she stated, again, without emotion. It was not a defense, but a simple boundary condition, a fact. Special projects, Thorne scoffed. That's where they hide the boondoggles, the science fair projects that are too embarrassing to shut down. Let me be clear, Doctor. Your mandate keeps you here. My authority runs this FOB. Stay out of the way of the men who are actually fighting the war. When the shooting starts, your models won't stop a bullet. He turned on his heel, his boots crunching on the gravel with theatrical finality, and stalked back toward the Tactical Operations Center, his men falling in behind him like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Vance watched him go. She analyzed his gait, the tension in his shoulders, the cadence of his speech. He was a system under stress, overconfident in his own capabilities and intolerant of any data that did not conform to his pre-existing framework. A predictable system. And predictable systems, under the right pressure, always failed in the same way. She turned back to her equipment. She took a microfiber cloth from a sealed pouch and carefully wiped the smudge from her screen. The data vortex spun, clean and perfect once more. She was not angry. She was merely collecting another data point. The commander's arrogance was just one more environmental variable to be measured, modeled, and, if necessary, accounted for. The sun continued its relentless climb, and in the deep, silent architecture of the mountains, something was about to shift. The first shot came without warning. It was not the familiar crack thump of a Kalashnikov or the heavy chatter of a PKM. It was a single, sharp report that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was immediately followed by the sound of a helmet, a high-tech Ops Corps fast helmet, hitting the gravel with a flat final clatter. A Marine corporal on guard duty at the ECP, the entry control point, crumpled to the ground, a neat, dark hole drilled through his helmet just above the brim. There was a moment of stunned silence, a collective intake of breath across the FOB. Chaos erupted. Alarms blared, their electronic shrieks tearing through the oppressive heat. Men shouted, grabbing for weapons, scrambling for cover. The FOB, a place of monotonous routine seconds before, became a frantic anthill kicked over. Vance did not move. Her systems had registered the event before the sound of the falling helmet reached her ears. On her screen, a brilliant red spike had appeared on the acoustic log. Geophone 7, the one she had buried deepest into the bedrock at the northern perimeter, had registered a sharp, high-frequency shockwave. The laser scanner, still painting the opposite mountainside, recorded a minute thermal bloom, a pinpoint of heat that vanished in less than a second. It was data. Pure, clean, terrifying data. Thorne's voice cut through the bedlam over the base-wide comms system, a roar of controlled fury. Counter-sniper teams, deploy! Overwatch 1 and 2, report! I want eyes on every peak now! Get a drone in the air! The response was professional and swift. Two two-man sniper teams, clad in camouflage that blended seamlessly with the gray rock, scrambled up to their designated overwatch positions on the FOB's fortified rooftops. Men with powerful spotting scopes began to systematically scan the labyrinthine ridges and crags of the opposing mountains. A small quadcopter drone buzzed into the sky, its camera gimbal swiveling as it raced toward the suspected area of origin. From her station, Vance watched it all unfold, not as a human drama, but as a series of inputs and outputs. The sniper was good, more than good. He was a ghost. The drone found nothing. The Overwatch team saw nothing. No muzzle flash, no movement, no glint of optics. 15 minutes passed. A tense, stretched-out eternity. A medical team had evacuated the fallen Marine, their movements hurried and low to the ground. The base was now in a state of lockdown, a crouched, nervous paralysis. Then the second shot came. It was identical to the first, a single, sharp crack that defied direction. This time it struck the primary communications antenna, a complex dish vital for satellite uplinks. A shower of sparks, a puff of vaporized metal, and the dish slumped sideways, useless. The FOB was now partially deaf, forced onto lower bandwidth, less secure backup systems. Vance's fingers flew across her keyboard. The acoustic signature was a perfect match to the first shot. The seismic tremor was identical in amplitude and frequency. But the laser scanner had picked up nothing this time. She cross-referenced the data streams. The shot sound had arrived at her microphone array with a 1.7 millisecond delay compared to the seismic shockwave registered by Geophone 7. The speed of sound in the current atmospheric conditions, 346 meters per second. The speed of a P wave through the specific gneiss formation of the valley floor, 5,800 meters per second. She ran the calculation. The origin point was not on the mountain face. It was in it. The sound was a secondary echo, a complex reflection. The primary acoustic event was being masked by the terrain. The seismic signature was the only true indicator. Thorne was losing his mind. His voice on the comms was growing tighter, more ragged. "Where is he? Someone find this son of a bitch. Mortar teams, grid 3, 4, 5, 9, or 6. Fire for effect. Blanket the whole damn ridge." Minutes later, the deep thump, thump, thump of the 81mm mortars echoed through the valley. Plumes of gray smoke and pulverized rock erupted on the distant ridge, a display of brute force against an invisible enemy. The explosions were loud, concussive, and utterly useless. Vance watched the impacts on her screen as a series of blooming seismic events, messy and chaotic. They were noise. They were just more noise, polluting her data, masking the clean, sharp signature of the sniper. The third shot came while the dust from the mortars was still settling. It didn't hit a person or a piece of equipment. It struck the ground 10 feet in front of the TOC, kicking up a puff of dirt. It was a message. "I can hit whatever I want, whenever I want. You are powerless." Panic, cold and sharp, began to seep into the FOB's atmosphere. The SEALs were professionals, the Marines disciplined, but this was different. This wasn't a firefight. It was a dissection. They were being taken apart, piece by piece, by an enemy they could not see, hear, or locate. Thorne's strategy of overwhelming force had failed, exposed as a clumsy tantrum against a surgical opponent. He had ordered his counter-snipers to fire on any potential glint or shadow, and they had sent a dozen rounds of .338 Lapua Magnum into empty rocks, their muzzle flashes giving away their positions. The Ghost did not return fire. He did not need to. He owned the valley. The sun began its slow descent, painting the peaks in hues of orange and blood red. The temperature dropped. Vance noted the change in her atmospheric data. The air density was increasing. The thermal layers were inverting. This would change the ballistic trajectory. It would change the acoustic propagation. The sniper would have to adjust his calculations, or perhaps he already had. The thought was clinical, a moment of professional respect for a fellow practitioner of applied physics, even if he was the enemy. Inside the TOC, the atmosphere was thick with failure. The screens showed static, useless drone feeds and topographical maps marked with meaningless red circles. Lieutenant Commander Thorne stood over a central table, his knuckles white where he gripped its edge. His face was a mask of fury and impotence. His men avoided his eyes. The strategy of the hammer had met a problem that was not a nail, and the hammer was broken. "Report," Thorne growled to his chief intelligence specialist. The man swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Sir, no visual confirmation, no thermal signature. The acoustic sensors are giving us conflicting vectors. They say the shot is coming from the north face, but the echo analysis puts it in the east. It's impossible. The triangulation is a mess." "Then fix it!" Thorne slammed his fist on the table, rattling a tray of coffee cups. Use the damn technology. That's what it's for. Sir, a new voice said, quiet but firm. It was Chief Petty Officer Decker, Thorne's most experienced operator. He was a man with a decade of quiet, lethal work behind him, his face a roadmap of hard-won experience. He was the observant subordinate, the one who valued results over bluster. The standard tech isn't working. The terrain is playing tricks on us. The echoes, it's like a hall of mirrors. Thorne rounded on him. Are you telling me we can't find one man with a rifle in my AO? Decker met his commander's glare without flinching. I'm telling you this isn't a standard sniper, sir. This is something else. He's using the environment against us. It was at that moment that the door to the TOC hissed open. Dr. Alara Vance stepped inside, holding her ruggedized laptop. The sudden influx of daylight made the men squint. She seemed to absorb the room's toxic atmosphere without reaction. Her presence was an island of calm in the storm of their frustration. She walked directly to the central table, placing her laptop down and opening it. The swirling vortex of colored data appeared, a stark contrast to the rigid military grids on the surrounding monitors. Thorne stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and incandescent rage. What do you think you're doing? Get out of my TOC. Vance ignored him. Her attention was on Decker. Chief, she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the tension. You were right. He's using the environment. Specifically, he's using a phenomenon known as acoustic shadowing and multipath interference. She pointed to her screen. These are the acoustic signatures of the 3 shots. They appear to originate from multiple points because the sound is reflecting off at least 4 distinct rock faces before it reaches our sensors. It's a calculated deception, but the sound is a lie. Her finger traced a thin, almost invisible line on her data plot. This is the seismic signature, a P wave traveling through the bedrock. It doesn't reflect. It travels in a straight line. It's the truth. Thorne stepped forward, his fists clenched. I don't have time for a goddamn science lecture. My men are pinned down by a hostile shooter. A hostile shooter, Vance continued, her eyes still on the screen. Who is located at grid 347, Alpha 811 Kilo. Specifically, he's inside a karst cave formation approximately 3 meters deep, with an aperture no wider than 30 centimeters. The cave entrance is concealed behind a curtain of hanging schist. It's a perfect sniper's hide, thermally shielded, acoustically masked, and with a natural funnel that directs his muzzle blast upward, not outward. That's why you have no flash signature. The room went silent. The men stared at her, then at the map, then back at her. The grid reference she had given them was on a sheer, vertical cliff face, a place no one would think to look, let alone fire from. It seemed impossible. That's insane, Thorne breathed. There's nothing there. It's a solid rock wall. It is not, Vance stated. My terrestrial laser scan shows a micro-fissure network consistent with limestone weathering. The seismic data confirms a cavity. The numbers do not lie, Commander. She looked up from her screen and met his eyes for the first time since entering the TOC. Her gaze was cold, clear, and absolute. Your methods have failed. Your counter-snipers are exposed. Your mortars were a waste of ordnance. You are fighting the ghost, not the man. I know where the man is. A profound shift occurred in the room. Authority, which moments before had been centered on the furious, decorated commander, began to flow, silent and inexorable, toward the small, quiet woman and her laptop of swirling colors. The men looked from Thorne's enraged, helpless face to Vance's calm, certain one. They were warriors, but they were also pragmatists. They recognized the ring of truth when they heard it, even if it came in a language they didn't understand. Decker was the first to move. He stepped away from Thorne and stood beside Vance, looking at her screen. He saw the logic, the clean lines of her data, the undeniable elegance of her solution. "Sir," he said, his voice level, addressing Thorne but his attention on Vance. "Her data is the only actionable intelligence we have. It's the only thing that makes sense of the chaos." Thorne looked at his chief, his most trusted man, and saw the shift in his eyes. It was not insubordination. It was a simple recognition of a higher competence. The foundation of his authority, built on rank and aggressive certainty, cracked. He was out of options. The ghost in the mountains was still out there, and another shot could come at any second. To refuse her now would be to admit complete and utter defeat. His pride warred with the desperate need for a solution. The war lasted a few agonizing seconds. "Fine," he bit out, the word tasting like ash. "What's your plan, Doctor? Another model?" "There is no way to get a direct line of sight on the target," Vance said, her tone unchanged. "The aperture is too small and at the wrong angle. Air support is useless. A mortar would be a 1 in a million shot. You cannot target the man." "So what's the point?" Thorne demanded, a flicker of triumphant justification in his eyes. "You don't target the man," Vance said. "You target the mountain." She zoomed in on her 3D model of the cliff face. It was a complex, beautiful structure of lines and shadows. The rock formation directly above the cave is a slab of metasandstone with a confirmed shear strength of 25 megapascals. However, my scan has identified a pre-existing fracture line, a geological fault, running diagonally across it. It's a point of critical weakness. She indicated a spot on the model, a few meters above and to the left of the hidden cave. A high-velocity projectile, a .50 BMG or a .338 Lapua, impacting this exact point will not shatter the rock. The kinetic energy will be channeled along the fracture line. It will create a shock wave, a contained directional burst of pressure inside the stone itself. This will cause a shear failure. The metasandstone slab, weighing approximately 2 tons, will detach and fall, sealing the cave entrance permanently. The SEALs in the room, men who dealt in the precise application of explosives, understood immediately. It was not a direct attack. It was demolition. It was weaponized geology. "That's," Decker started, then stopped, searching for the word. "That's elegant." "It's a ricochet," Thorne sneered, his last gasp of defiance. "You're talking about a trick shot, a 1 in a billion chance." "It is not a ricochet," Vance corrected him, her patience as thin and sharp as a shard of obsidian. "A ricochet is an uncontrolled deflection. This is a calculated transfer of energy. It is not chance. It is physics, and I have done the math." She turned the laptop to face him fully. A new screen was up. It was a complex ballistics table, factoring in wind speed, air density, temperature, humidity, the Coriolis effect, and the spin drift of a specific projectile. At the bottom was a single set of coordinates for elevation and windage. "The solution is precise, but the shot must be as well." Thorne stared at the numbers. It was a foreign language to him, but he understood the insane confidence behind them. He looked around at his men. He saw it in their faces. They wanted to believe. They needed to believe. His authority was gone, evaporated into the thin mountain air. All that was left was the mission. He finally nodded, a short, jerky motion of defeat. Decker, take your team. Decker shook his head slowly. No, sir. All eyes snapped to him. None of us can make that shot. We're shooters, not physicists. We don't see the world the way she does. We'd be guessing. He turned to Vance, his expression one of complete, unadulterated professional respect. You have the solution. You have to take the shot. The suggestion hung in the air, audacious and utterly logical. Vance did not react. She simply absorbed the statement, processed it. Her expertise was in calculation, not execution. She had never fired a military-grade sniper rifle in her life. But she understood the logic. The system required a perfect input to generate the desired output. Any deviation, any human hesitation or misinterpretation of her data by another shooter would introduce an unacceptable margin of error. Your rifle, she said to Decker, her voice flat. It's a customized Mark 13 Model 7, correct? Chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum. What's the barrel twist rate and your preferred load? Decker blinked, momentarily stunned by the specificity. 1 in 10 twist. I'm running 220 grain Sierra Match Kings. Vance nodded, her fingers a blur on the keyboard. The numbers on her ballistics table shifted slightly. Acceptable, she said. The procession from the TOC to the western perimeter was silent and surreal. Decker led the way, carrying his rifle case. Vance followed, her laptop under her arm. Thorne and the rest of the SEALs trailed behind, a silent, humbled entourage. They were no longer the tip of the spear. They were witnesses. They reached her station, the place where Thorne had belittled her only hours before. The sun was low now, casting long, distorted shadows. The air was cool and still. Perfect conditions. Decker laid the rifle case on the ground and opened it. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was the Mark 13. It was a beautiful and terrible object, a tool of ultimate precision. It was not the standard issue. It had been modified, balanced, and perfected by Decker over years of use. It was an extension of him. He lifted it out, the action smooth and silent. He set up the bipod on a flat, stable patch of ground, the legs digging into the hard-packed earth. He checked the chamber, then the magazine. Then he looked at Vance. Without a word, he took a step back from the weapon. He handed her his rifle and stepped away. Vance moved into his place. She lay down on the shooting mat they had placed for her, her body small behind the large, powerful weapon. She did not handle it with the practiced ease of a soldier, but with the delicate precision of a scientist handling a sensitive instrument. Her hands were steady, her movements economical. She settled the buttstock into her shoulder, her cheek finding the stock weld. She looked through the high-powered scope. The world through the Night Force optic was a magnified, cross-hatched version of the one she had been studying for weeks. She saw the cliff face, the seemingly unbroken wall of stone. But she was not looking with her eyes. She was looking with her data. She knew what was behind the rock, what lay along the invisible fracture lines. She could see the matrix of numbers and vectors overlaid on the physical world. She attached her laptop to the scope's integrated data port. Her ballistic solution appeared in the corner of her heads-up display. The numbers were clear. Elevation, plus 11.4 mils. Windage, 0.2 mils left. She reached up and began to adjust the turrets on the scope. The clicks were sharp and distinct in the profound silence that had fallen over the FOB. Every man on the perimeter was watching, holding their breath. Thorne stood with his arms crossed, his face an unreadable mask of stone. Decker knelt a few feet away, his eyes fixed on Vance, his trust absolute. Click, click, click. She dialed in the elevation. 11 full mills, then 4 more clicks. Click, click. She adjusted for the slight left-to-right breeze she had measured with her own anemometer, a breeze too subtle for the base's cruder instruments to register. Now. Her finger moved to the trigger. She was calm. Her heart rate, she noted clinically, was a steady 68 beats per minute. She was not a soldier. She was not a killer. She was a system controller, providing a final, critical input. She let out half a breath and held it, finding the natural respiratory pause. The crosshairs were perfectly steady on the point her model had designated, a point on a flat, featureless piece of rock. It felt like aiming at nothing. She pressed the trigger. The explosion of the rifle was shocking in the silence, a violent, concussive roar that slammed back into her shoulder. The recoil was immense, a physical shock she had calculated but was still unprepared for. For a split second, the scope picture was a blur of motion. Then it settled. Through the shimmering heat haze of the barrel, she watched the distant cliff face. For a full 2 seconds, nothing happened. The bullet was in transit, a tiny speck of metal crossing a kilometer of air, governed by the laws of physics she had codified on her screen. Thorne let out a short, sharp breath, a sound of bitter vindication. He had been right. A trick shot. A failure. Then the mountain answered. There was no sound at first, just a visual ripple. A faint puff of dust appeared on the rock face, exactly where she had aimed. A dark line, a crack, appeared as if by magic, racing diagonally across the stone. It was the fracture line, failing under the precise application of kinetic energy. The rock face seemed to shimmer, to liquefy for a heartbeat. Then, with a deep, grinding groan that vibrated through the very bedrock of the valley, the 2-ton slab of metasandstone detached. It did not explode. It simply let go, sliding downward with an unstoppable geological slowness, and covered the area of the hidden cave. It came to rest with a final, booming crump that echoed like the closing of a tomb door. A cloud of ancient dust, undisturbed for millennia, billowed out and then slowly settled. Silence. A profound, absolute silence fell over the valley. It was a different kind of quiet than before. The tense, coiled silence of the hunter and the hunted was gone. This was the silence of completion, the silence of a problem solved. The ghost was gone. The threat was neutralized. Vance pushed herself up from the rifle, her shoulder aching. The smell of burnt gunpowder was sharp in her nostrils. She looked at the silent, impassive cliff face. The solution was elegant, the execution flawless. Decker was the first to speak. He didn't shout or cheer. He just let out a long, slow breath he seemed to have been holding all day. Jesus, he whispered, a sound of pure, unadulterated awe. He looked from the mountain to Vance, and his expression was one a man might give to a miracle. The other SEALs were motionless, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. They had just witnessed something that defied the rules of their world. It was then that the radio on Thorne's vest crackled to life. It was a satellite link, a priority channel that had bypassed the damaged dish. Sentinel Actual, this is Olympus. Do you copy? The voice was calm, powerful, and laden with authority. It was a 4-star general. Thorne seemed to shake himself from his stupor. He fumbled for his radio. Olympus, this is Sentinel Actual. Go ahead. Commander, the general's voice was like ice. I've been monitoring your situation and listening to your comms for the last 3 hours. My report shows you have expended a dozen mortar rounds, 30-plus rounds of counter-sniper fire, and have lost one Marine in your primary SATCOM array. And yet the hostile threat was just neutralized. Is that correct? Thorne swallowed. The public reckoning had begun. That is correct, sir. And who, Commander, neutralized the threat? The question hung in the air. Thorne looked at the SEALs around him, then at the rifle lying on the mat, and finally at Dr. Vance, who was calmly disconnecting her laptop. Sir, Thorne said, his voice strained, the shot was taken by a civilian analyst. There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was not a pause of confusion, but of confirmation. A civilian analyst, the general repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Commander Thorne, were you aware that Dr. Vance is not, in fact, a geologist? Thorne's head snapped up. He stared at Vance, who continued to pack her gear, oblivious or indifferent to the conversation. Sir? Her designation, the general said, his voice cutting like a diamond, is Echo. She is the lead operational physicist for the Asymmetric Warfare Group's Environmental Dynamics Division. She doesn't study rocks, Commander. She weaponizes them. Her file is designated Tier 1, above your security clearance. She was sent to your FOB to model and mitigate geological and acoustic threats you chose to ignore in favor of, and I'm quoting the after-action report I'm currently reading, a very expensive, very useless academic exercise. You had the single most advanced tactical analysis asset on the continent at your disposal, a woman who can use a mountain range as a targeting computer, and you told her to stay out of the way. The blood drained from Thorne's face. The name Echo was a whisper in the special operations community, a legend, a ghost story about an analyst who could predict ambushes from the way dust settled and locate enemies by the vibrations in the ground. It was a myth, a boogeyman told to new intelligence officers. And she was standing right here. He had mocked her. He had threatened her. The full, crushing weight of his arrogance, his catastrophic failure of imagination, settled on him. He had not just been wrong, he had been a fool, a loud, strutting amateur in the presence of a master. Commander, the general's voice was final, you are to turn over command of the FOB to your executive officer, effective immediately. You will be on the next transport back to Bagram, where you will face a formal inquiry. Do you understand me? Yes, sir, Thorne whispered. The words were dust in his mouth. One more thing, Commander. Find Dr. Vance. Tell her Olympus sends his regards, and then you will get out of her way. Is that clear? Crystal, sir, Thorne managed to say. The line went dead. He stood there, a statue of a commander, his authority stripped from him in a few curt sentences over a radio. His world had been dismantled as neatly and efficiently as the sniper had been entombed. He looked at Vance, who was now closing the lid of her Pelican case. She had shown no reaction to the general's revelation. Her identity, her legend, was just another variable, of no more consequence to her than the ambient air pressure. A new order had been established on FOB Sentinel, not by a change of command, but by a demonstration of pure, undeniable competence. The hierarchy of rank had been replaced by a hierarchy of skill. Vance was now the center of gravity. The men no longer saw a curious civilian. They saw Echo. They saw the ghost who had spoken to the mountain, and the mountain had obeyed. They kept their distance, their respect now tinged with a deep, profound awe. Later that evening, as Vance was running a final diagnostic on her geophones, Decker approached her. He did not come with praise or questions about the shot. He simply held out a metal canteen cup, steam rising from it. "Coffee," he said. It was his only word. Vance took it. The metal was warm against her cool fingers. "Thank you, Chief," she said. He nodded, then hesitated. "The way you calculated the energy transfer, you used the rock's modulus of rupture, didn't you, to predict the shear failure?" Vance took a sip of the coffee. It was black and bitter, but hot. "And the Poisson's ratio," she replied. "The lateral strain was the key." Decker nodded slowly, a student absorbing a fundamental lesson. He did not understand the terms, not fully, but he understood the mind that used them. He understood that the world was infinitely more complex than he had ever imagined, and that true mastery came not from force, but from understanding. He stood there for a moment longer, in the quiet presence of this new authority, then gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of respect and walked away. It was the only acknowledgement she needed, the quiet communion of two professionals, each a master of their own domain. 2 days later, a Black Hawk helicopter descended into the FOB, its rotors kicking up a storm of dust. It was not a standard transport. It carried no markings. Dr. Ilara Vance, her Pelican case in one hand and her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, walked toward it. The new commander of the FOB, a chastened but efficient lieutenant, stood with Decker to see her off. No one spoke. There were no goodbyes to be said. She climbed into the open door of the helicopter and took a seat. She did not look back. Her work here was done. The model was complete. The threat was neutralized. The lesson had been taught. As the Black Hawk lifted off, banking sharply over the valley, she looked out the window. She saw the FOB shrinking below, a tiny island of order in a vast, chaotic wilderness. She saw the mountains, ancient and silent, their faces scarred by sunlight and shadow. And she saw the fresh, pale scar on the cliff face, the tombstone she had carved with physics and a single, perfectly placed bullet. She felt no pride, no satisfaction. Only the quiet hum of a system returned to equilibrium. She was echo, a ghost in the machine of the world, and there was always another signal to find in the noise, another mountain waiting to be heard.